Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 131 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is one of those fish that is very important to the ecology of our river systems, but many people don't know, and many people would actually think this is a trash fish. It is in fact a very important part and a very good indicator to ecological health. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is, the blue sucker. Now the blue sucker, or scientific name Cyclepus elongatus, again that is Cyclepus elongatus, it is part of the family Catastomidae, which is the family of suckers. All of the suckers are much more important than people give them credit for. Many people think they are trash fish. They are in fact not. They are very, very important. They are native to the United States area. They are found in the Mississippi River Basin all the way to Texas. So think of like a semi-fan. No, I would not like to blur the chat again. It used to be thought that they extended down to Mexico in the Rio Grande Basin, but that is not the case. The Rio Grande population is actually a distinct population. It is its own species. That's relatively recent, and I want to say relatively, it's not that new, but it's still new enough that it's not everywhere. Many people say that the blue sucker can be found down into Mexico, but that is a distinct, undescribed population. Distinct species, by the way. In terms of where you're going to find this, these are actually a large water fish, large river fish. They're found in areas of extremely fast current, and they are primarily found in deep areas. They really like to hang out in the thalweg of rivers. And the thalweg is basically the deepest and fastest flowing part of the rivers. That's just a fancy term. It's not even that fancy. I believe it is a German word, but I'm not entirely sure. But thalweg. But they're found in these larger rivers. So these are not going to be something that you find in these shallow, low stream order streams. Not your headwaters. These are going to be found in the bigger rivers that usually have more turbid waters. A lot of suckerfish, the catastomids, actually hang out in very clear waters, but these actually are usually in more turbid waters, which you would expect. Larger rivers are usually significantly more turbid than these small order streams. They're really found around sand, gravel, and rubble bottoms. They like boulders, they like gravel, which is to be expected if you know anything about the sucker family, or if you can guess. The suckerfish really like these hard substrates, but they can be found over some sand bottoms, but I would not expect that to be their main area of influence. Now they are a large sucker. They have an average length of about 76 centimeters, which is about 29.9 inches, and an average weight of about 2 to 3 kilograms, which is about 4.5 to 6.5 pounds. That's apparently the average. All the research I could do found the max record length of 102 centimeters, which is 40.2 inches. Do believe they get bigger than that, but I'm not going to 100%. I don't think it's that uncommon to get them around 85 centimeters. Maybe I'm wrong there. I'm not entirely sure. But apparently the max I could find any reference to was 102 centimeters, which is about 40.2 inches if I hadn't mentioned that, by the way. The color does vary based on season and age. You can see here, this is kind of your steel gray olive shading that you see a lot throughout the year. But towards breeding season, the males will actually get this kind of almost jet black color in the spring, which is where they get, that's their breeding season. So that's not necessarily that unheard of. for color to change during breeding. In fact, it's relatively common. So it's not that unheard of. A little interesting tidbit, if you notice, this is a male, and you can tell because the males will get these tubercles. Usually it's only on their head, but this one looks like it kind of developed it throughout most of its body. Probably a big bull male. This guy is right there. Those nuptial tubercles are, almost little warts, you could say. We've discussed nuptial tubercles before. They're very common throughout most of the minnow family, which this is not. But yeah, it's usually develops during breeding season and then goes away. Which, by the way, breeding season would be around the spring, because that's why they're changing their color in the spring. They do have this cylindrical, torpedo-shaped body. If you can't tell, they're very, very hydrodynamic. They have this slight humpback, and that actually just helps them with their hydrodynamics. They're sitting on the bottom. If you got this flat belly that allows them to stay on the bottom, and then this humpback that's almost like a keel, because they're a little bit laterally compressed, but not much, but very little, just enough to create that sort of keel, that like a boat keel, that allows them to cut through that water, staying down on the bottom, allowing those hydrodynamics, this hydrodynamic aspect to take effect. Something else you may note, it's kind of hard to see in this picture. Actually, it's hard to see in this picture, but okay, here you go. They have a very elongated dorsal fin. They have one of the largest fins of any of the sucker family, and they have this extreme difference in the front and the back of the fin, and it's got this falcated pattern, which is, think of like a sickle or a sword, scimitar, there you go. This falcated front part of the dorsal is pretty good and distinctive. This is also another male, obviously. You can see it's got this really, to me, that's a really neat aspect to the dorsal fin. The mouth is an inferior mouth, meaning it is on the bottom, as you'd expect with a suckerfish. Any fish that has the word sucker in it, you could almost bet that it's going to have a very inferior mouth. But what's interesting about the blue sucker is that its mouth has a ton of papillae all around the outside of the mouth, on its lips. Extremely bumpy lips. Those papillae, bumps, warts, whatever you want to call them, those are actually, I believe they're both sensory organs, and they allow for better grip in these fast moving waters. They're gripping on that substrate, and this sort of, these papillae really allow them to hold on better while sensing for their food. And I guess I should also mention, if you haven't noticed, they actually do have extremely large scales. Very, very large scales. You can easily see defined definition between all the scales. But what's interesting is the catastomids, a lot of them have papillae around their mouth. Not all of them have blue sucker extreme papillae, but it would make sense because these are, an algae and a micro insect. That is what these things are feeding on, especially algae. So they're going on these rocks, which is why you'd expect these to be around those, gravel and rubble and boulder sort of rivers. They're grabbing onto these rocks and basically sticking to them and just kind of shuffling along, using that mouth to detect for insects. They're scraping algae off the rocks. They're very, very much associated with that sort of feeding aspect. The papillae are helping them sense because they can't really look down. This looks absolutely horrifying. Yeah, if this is the picture that shows up on the YouTube, it might put some people off, but it's such an important aspect of their life history that it's really impossible to ignore. You can even see how big the papillae are from this side. You can see them right there. This is a good example of their really kind of bull nose snout right here. It's almost, I always attribute blue suckers, it looks like they went to ran into a glass wall and just smushed their nose and their mouth just went bloop. That's kind of how I associate it. Now, these are a rarer fish. They are in trouble. In some places, they're in severe trouble. Even though they actually have a pretty wide range, they are pretty rare today. And it's thought to be due to the segmentation of habitat. Dams are causing all these segmentations to happen, especially the ones that have been built in the last century. When you get dams, you usually get more urbanization, which causes pollution. And these fish are very, very, very susceptible to pollution. Very susceptible. It's almost unheard. That's why some of my favorite fish in the rivers I work on are these sucker fish. Because if I see these sucker fish, they're extremely difficult to catch. My goodness, suckers are extremely difficult to catch. These fish are fast, okay? These fish are fast. Do not think that they're, just kind of like lethargically going along the bottom. They can book it. My goodness, they can. Oh my goodness. But when I see them, it lets me know that the rivers I'm working in are doing well. Because if a river starts becoming polluted, usually these would be the first fish to go. So if you had an area that had blue suckers and all of a sudden they're dying off and you're not getting them, it's actually a pretty decent indicator that pollution is happening. Another thing about it is siltation from the dams, which is another side effect of dam building. Siltation, causing the buildup of sediment in these gravel and rocks, causes less algae to grow. They can't really attach and everything. They can't really feed off that sand and siltation. So that also causes problems. So they're very susceptible to human influence, basically. They're extremely adapted to these pristine riverine systems. By the way, I do not have blue sucker in the rivers I work in, so don't think I get to be as lucky as this. I have a different sucker. Still a beautiful sucker fish, and I believe we talked about it in one of my previous Fish Friday videos. But can't all have the cool fish, I guess I should say. Dams, going back to the dams are actually also a major hindrance to their movement patterns. These fish actually do have a sort of spawning migration. They can move extremely large distances to find suitable spawning habitat. I was under the impression, and I've definitely found conflicting opinions. Some people say that they go to the same sort of place, which usually they're going to like riffles and everything, in sort of like a little backwater eddies to spawn. Some people say they go to the exact same ones. Other people say that they go to a different one. So couldn't really find that, but I do believe that they can migrate. In fact, some evidence I've seen says that adults can travel over 300 kilometers, which is around 185 miles, in search of this suitable spawning habitat. And because of these spawning migrations, this used to be heavily commercially harvested. The blue sucker actually was heavily commercially harvested. In the late 1800s, nearly 2 million pounds of blue suckers were harvested from a 21-mile section of the Mississippi River for human consumption. Now, obviously, their populations are not large enough to even consider harvesting them, but people still go out and fish for them. Don't get me wrong, but I want to go back to that, and I don't know if you caught that. In the late 1800s, nearly 2 million pounds were harvested. You probably heard that part and like, whoa, that's a large number. But that was from a 21-mile section of the Mississippi River. So you take the entire Mississippi River, which is a length that I'd have to Google, and it's just a 21 section. So that shows how abundant they used to be and how susceptible they were to human influence. In fact, their commercial harvest for human consumption, I believe another name for these fish are called the sweet suckers. Apparently it's extremely delicious to eat and has a bit of a sweet taste to it. I've never had one, so I can't say, but I do believe that one of their other common names was actually the sweet sucker. But so many fish were harvested for human consumption. They were extremely important to indigenous peoples and to pioneers for survival because they were so plentiful and so good, I guess, and probably have a very high nutrient dense body. These things are torpedoes, and I mean they are extremely muscular, so there's probably quite a bit of food in one of these fish. But now for the interesting fact that we're going to end the video on. These fish, one of the most interesting, and it may not even be the most interesting fact to me, is how long-lived these fish are. When people think of long-lived fish, they're thinking sharks, they're thinking sturgeons, things like that. But a lot of those fish are kind of associated with the marine side of things. There's not too many fish that are in freshwater that are thought to be like long-lived. And these have actually been documented to live longer than 40 years. 40 years. But some recent research has begun to show that they may live longer than that. I believe there's some research coming out that says that they have cyclical spawning periods, meaning that they don't spawn year over year. I'm not 100% on this, so please go do some extra research. But if that's the case and they're doing cyclical spawning periods, that would mean that traditional age dating methods may not be 100% effective, because if they're not spawning year over year, they might have an extra year of non-growth. So it might throw it into a loop, basically. Throw it out of whack. Not non-growth, an extra year of growth. So that means that these could theoretically live significantly longer than that. And there's not really a good indication of how long these fish could live because they were so heavily commercially harvested that chances are the larger, older ones got harvested very quickly. So I would not be surprised if one of these fish were found to live 50, 60, 80 years old. It would not surprise me at all. But regardless, an absolutely beautiful fish. There is tons of research and absolutely enormous amounts of money going in to help this fish out, which in better helps the ecosystem out. Which that is a large thing that a lot of people don't realize about endangered species. Endangered species are usually considered... I just broke my mic. I broke my mic. I gotta hold this. Endangered species are usually considered keystone species, and keystone species are a species... that's a bad... No, not a keystone. A biological indicator species. Endangered species are good indicators of what is going on in the environment. So if you remember what I said, the suckers are very susceptible to pollutions on a number of levels. So these being endangered, if you go out and these populations are increasing, which in a lot of areas they are actually increasing, if the blue sucker population is increasing, and the reason why it had decreased was because of pollution and siltation, but they're increasing now, that gives you a good indicator of that what you're doing to help this river ecology out is doing what you wanted. So it's actually very important. And that's a very important thing about endangered species that a lot of people just kind of overlook or are unaware of. It's not necessarily that the species is in trouble and that the things we're doing are going to just directly influence this species. A lot of efforts that are going into help endangered species are to help the habitat, the environment, the ecology of the system as a whole. Because if the blue sucker is doing well, then that means everything is doing well, because everything's getting better. But I just wanted to throw that out there. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you do. I'd really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. Love all the comments. Thank you so much for the love and support. It has been absolutely incredible recently. Growing at a relatively steady rate. I just love it. I hope you enjoy these Fish Fridays, and I have a special Fish Friday for number 150. So we got about 20 more to go. But regardless, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.